I never knew what was worse, the fact that he left me when I told him I was pregnant, or the fact that years later, I was the one standing in the operating room, holding his heart in my hands and deciding whether he would live or die. This isn't a story about reconciliation. It's a story about betrayal, about a woman left behind when she needed him most, and about how she rose above every wound, and ultimately, how she became the one holding power over his fate. My name is Elena Brooks, and this is how I went from being abandoned and broken to becoming the person who would determine his destiny. I was 23 when I first met Miles Davenport in our anatomy class at Colorado State University. I was there on a partial scholarship, working nights at a local diner to pay for what the aide didn't cover. Miles was there because his father, the chairman of Davenport Pharmaceuticals, expected it. He walked into Professor Martinez's lecture hall 15 minutes late that Tuesday morning. Designer jacket slung over his shoulder. Not a care in the world. While the rest of us scrambled to take notes on cardiac muscle tissue, he leaned back in his chair with an arrogance that should have been off-putting, but somehow wasn't. "You're Elena, right?" He slid into the seat next to me after class, ignoring the fact that 3 other students were obviously hoping for his attention. "I heard you aced the last exam." I looked up from packing my worn textbooks. "And you are?" "Miles." He flashed a smile that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition. "I was wondering if you'd want to grab coffee sometime. Maybe help me understand why I can't seem to remember the difference between arteries and veins." I should have said no. Should have recognized the casual way he assumed I'd be available. The practiced charm that suggested he'd had this conversation before. Instead, I found myself saying yes. That coffee date led to dinner at a restaurant where the appetizers cost more than I made in a night of tips. Dinner led to drives in his Porsche through the mountains, windows down, music loud enough to drown out the voice in my head that whispered, I didn't belong in this world. Miles introduced me to a life I'd only seen in movies. Weekend trips to his family's lake house, where I'd wake up in Egyptian cotton sheets and watch him make breakfast in a kitchen that was bigger than my entire apartment. He'd pull me onto the deck overlooking the water, his arms around me as we watched the sunrise. And for those moments, I let myself believe this was real. "You're different," he told me one evening as we sat by the fireplace. "All the other girls I've dated, they just want the money, the connections. You actually care about becoming a doctor." I should have paid more attention to the way he said, "other girls." Should have wondered why someone who claimed to value my independence kept trying to solve my problems with his credit card. 3 months in, everything changed. I was running late for our date, rushing across campus from my shift at the diner, when I heard his voice coming from the student center. He was with his usual crowd, the sons and daughters of Colorado's elite, the ones who treated college like an extended vacation. "Come on, Miles," one of them was saying. "You've been with the scholarship girl for months now. When are you going to close the bet?" I stopped walking. "It's not that simple," Miles replied, and I could hear the laughter in his voice. "Elena's not like the others. She actually thinks this is going somewhere. That's what makes it so perfect." Another voice chimed in. "The innocent ones always fall the hardest. So what's the timeline? Another month?" "Maybe 2, Miles said. "I want to really sell it. The whole, I love you thing. Maybe even meet her family. Then, boom. Done. $5,000, right?" The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. No confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just the quiet dissolution of everything I'd thought was real. That night, I didn't answer his calls, or the next day, or the day after that. When he finally cornered me outside the library, his face was a mask of concern that I now recognized as performance. "Elena, what's wrong? You've been avoiding me for days." "I heard you," I said simply. "At the student center. The bet?" For just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw something cold flicker behind his eyes before the concerned boyfriend expression returned. "You misunderstood," he said. "It wasn't." $5,000, I interrupted. "That's what I'm worth, right?" What they're paying you to make me fall in love with you? He opened his mouth to lie again, but I was already walking away. This time, I didn't look back. 3 weeks later, I was hunched over a toilet in my apartment bathroom, my body rejecting the breakfast I'd barely managed to eat. The nausea had been building for days, accompanied by a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. I stared at the pregnancy test in my trembling hands, watching the second line appear with crystal clarity. Positive. The world tilted sideways. I was 23, barely scraping by financially, and the father of my child had bet money on breaking my heart. I called Miles anyway. Elena. His voice was surprised, cautious. I didn't expect to hear from you. We need to talk, I said. Can you meet me at Brewster's Cafe in an hour? Of course, Elena, I'm glad you called. I've been wanting to explain. 1 hour, I repeated, and hung up. I sat across from him in the corner booth, watching him fidget with his coffee cup. He looked nervous, guilty, like someone preparing to deliver a well-rehearsed apology. Miles, I said, cutting through his stammered excuses. I'm pregnant. The color drained from his face. What? I'm pregnant, about 6 weeks. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Okay, this is manageable. I know a doctor who can take care of this discreetly. I'll pay for everything. Of course, you won't have to worry about anything. Take care of it, I repeated. The procedure. It's simple, really. You'll be back to normal in a few days. I felt something inside me go very still. And if I don't want to take care of it? His expression hardened. Elena, be realistic. You're a student. You have no money, no support system. You can't seriously be considering. I'm not asking you to marry me, I said quietly. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm just telling you that you're going to be a father. He leaned back, his face settling into the cold mask I'd glimpsed outside the library. No, I'm not. Miles. I'm not going to be a father, he repeated. Not to your child. And if you try to claim otherwise, my family's lawyers will make sure you regret it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. I'm going to write you a check for $20,000. That should be more than enough to handle this situation and help you get back on your feet. I stared at the check he slid across the table. You think you can pay me to disappear? I think we both know this was never going to work out, he said. You're not my type, Elena. You're not our type. This was fun while it lasted, but it's time to be practical. I picked up the check and slowly tore it in half. I don't want your money, Miles. I don't want anything from you. Good, he said, standing up. Because you're not getting anything, not from me, not from my family. If you try to come after us, we'll destroy you. He walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving me alone with the choice that would define the rest of my life. I chose my child. I left Colorado 3 days later with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases and my grandmother's old Honda Civic. My destination was Portland, Oregon, where my Aunt Rachel lived in a small house near the river. Rachel Moore was my father's sister, a nurse who'd never married and had always been the black sheep of our family. She took one look at me, standing on her doorstep, pregnant and heartbroken, and simply said, "Come in, honey. Let's get you settled." Those first months were the hardest of my life. I found work as a medical secretary at Portland General Hospital, filing insurance claims and answering phones for $12 an hour. The morning sickness was brutal, but I forced myself to work through it, knowing that every dollar mattered. At night, I studied. I'd withdrawn from Colorado State, but I wasn't giving up on medical school. I enrolled in online courses, slowly chipping away at my remaining requirements while my body changed and my future grew more uncertain. The pregnancy was difficult. I spent my 3rd trimester on partial bed rest, watching my savings disappear while my belly grew. Rachel never complained about supporting me, but I saw the strain in her face, the way she'd check her bank balance after grocery shopping. Leo was born on a snowy February morning, 3 weeks early and screaming loud enough to wake the entire maternity ward. The moment they placed him on my chest, tiny and perfect and completely dependent on me, I felt something inside me crystallize into steel. This was my son, my responsibility, my purpose. I would not let him down. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights and impossible schedules. I worked at the hospital during the day, took online classes in the evenings, and spent my nights caring for Leo. Rachel helped when she could, but she was working her own full-time job and dealing with her own health problems. When Leo was 18 months old, I applied to return to medical school. Not at Colorado State, I never wanted to see that place again, but at Oregon Health and Science University. The admissions committee was skeptical about accepting a single mother with a gap in her education. But my grades and MCAT scores spoke for themselves. The dean of admissions, Dr. Patricia Huang, called me personally to offer me a spot. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "your application is unusual, but your academic record is exceptional. However, I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? Medical school is demanding under the best circumstances, with a small child." "Dr. Huang," I interrupted. "I've been working full-time and taking care of my son while completing my prerequisites. I've maintained a 4.0 GPA. I understand that medical school will be challenging, but I'm not going to let anything stop me from becoming a doctor." "In that case," she said, "welcome to OHSU." Medical school with a toddler was exactly as difficult as everyone predicted. I woke up at 4 a.m. every morning to study before Leo woke up. I arranged my clinical rotations around daycare schedules. I studied while he napped, while he played, while he watched cartoons. Leo grew up in hospital corridors and study groups. He learned to be quiet in libraries, to entertain himself with coloring books while I attended lectures. By the time he was 4, he could identify different types of medical equipment and knew the names of all the major organs. "Mommy," he said one day, looking up from his picture book about the human body, "are you going to be a doctor like Dr. Martinez?" Dr. Martinez was his pediatrician, a kind woman who always had time to answer his questions about how stethoscopes worked. "Yes, sweetheart," I told him. "But I'm going to be a doctor who fixes hearts. Like fixing broken toys." Something like that. My classmates thought I was crazy. Most of them were 22, single, and could dedicate every waking moment to their studies. I was 31, exhausted, and splitting my attention between organic chemistry and potty training. But I had something they didn't. A reason to succeed that went beyond grades or prestige. Every late night, every missed social event, every moment of doubt was worth it because I was building a future for my son. When I graduated summa cum laude, Leo was 7 years old and sitting in the front row of the auditorium, wearing his best shirt and tie. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, he stood up and cheered so loudly that the entire audience turned to look at him. "That's my mom," he shouted, completely uninhibited. "She's going to be a doctor." I looked at him from the stage, this remarkable little boy who had grown up believing that anything was possible because he'd watched me make it possible, and I felt the last piece of my broken heart heal. My residency in internal medicine was grueling, but I'd been preparing for grueling for years. I worked 36-hour shifts, studied for board exams, and somehow managed to maintain a relationship with my son that was more than just bedtime stories and hurried breakfasts. After residency, I specialized in cardiology. It seemed fitting, somehow, considering how much heart damage I'd survived. I completed my fellowship at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, leaving Leo with Rachel for 2 years while I trained under some of the best cardiac surgeons in the country. When I returned to Portland, I was 38 years old and one of the youngest board-certified cardiologists in the Pacific Northwest. I opened my own practice, Brooks Cardiology, in a modern medical building downtown. The first year was tough, building a patient base, establishing relationships with referring physicians, managing the business side of medicine. It was a different kind of challenge than medical school had been. But I'd learned to embrace challenges. Leo was 14 now, tall and serious, with an academic intensity that reminded me of myself at his age. He spent his afternoons at the clinic, doing homework in my office and occasionally helping with filing. The staff adored him, and he'd become something of a mascot for the practice. Dr. Brooks, my receptionist, Janet, said one afternoon, "Leo's been explaining cardiac catheterization to the maintenance guy. I think he knows more about your procedures than some of your residents." I found Leo in the break room, earnestly discussing the differences between angioplasty and stenting with Tom, our building's maintenance supervisor. "Mom," Leo said when he saw me. Tom was asking about why people get chest pain, and I was explaining how blocked arteries work. "Is it okay if I show him the model heart?" "Of course," I said, ruffling his hair. "Just remember that Tom has other work to do." "Actually, Dr. Brooks," Tom said, "this is fascinating. The kid's got a real gift for explaining things." I watched Leo carefully arrange the anatomical model, pointing out the coronary arteries and explaining how blood flow worked. He was going to be a doctor. I realized, not because I wanted him to be, but because he genuinely loved understanding how things worked. That night, as we ate dinner in our small house near the river, Leo looked up from his homework and said, "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if my dad had stuck around?" It was a question he'd asked before, usually when he was younger and more curious about the empty space in our family structure. I'd always answered honestly but simply, his father had chosen not to be part of our lives, and that was his loss. "Sometimes," I said, "but then I think about how strong you've become, how independent, how kind, and I think maybe things worked out exactly the way they were supposed to." "I'm glad it's just us," he said, returning to his algebra homework. "We make a good team." "The best team." I agreed. I had no idea that in 3 months, our perfectly constructed world would be shattered by a medical emergency that would bring my past crashing into my present. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I was on call for the cardiac surgery unit, which meant I was used to middle-of-the-night emergencies. But something about the urgency in the nurse's voice made me fully alert immediately. "Dr. Brooks, we have a 42-year-old male presenting with acute chest pain, elevated troponins, and ST segment elevation on EKG. He's asking for you specifically." That was unusual. Emergency cardiac patients typically didn't get to choose their surgeon. "What's the patient's name?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "Miles Davenport. He says he knows you." The phone slipped from my hand. 20 years. 20 years since I'd last seen him. Since he'd walked out of that cafe and threatened to destroy me if I tried to claim him as my child's father. 20 years since I'd made the choice to build a life without him. To raise Leo alone. To become someone who didn't need anyone. And now he was lying in my emergency room, asking for me. I dressed quickly and drove to the hospital, in silence. My mind racing, Miles Davenport. The name I'd trained myself not to think about. The ghost that had haunted the early years of Leo's life whenever my son asked about his father. The emergency room was controlled chaos when I arrived. Nurses moved efficiently between patients. Monitors beeped and hummed. And the familiar smell of antiseptic and anxiety filled the air. "Dr. Brooks?" A young resident approached me. "The patient in room 7 is asking for you. He's stable for now. But his cardiac enzymes are elevated and the EKG shows clear signs of myocardial infarction." I nodded, pushing aside everything except my medical training. Whatever history Miles and I had, right now he was just another patient having a heart attack. I pushed open the door to room 7 and saw him for the first time in 2 decades. He looked older, obviously. The thick dark hair was now silver at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were young. But the basic structure was the same: the strong jaw, the sharp cheekbones, the mouth that had once whispered promises he'd never intended to keep. He was conscious, oxygen cannula in his nose, electrodes attached to his chest. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "Elena." His voice was weaker than I remembered, strained by pain and medication. I can't believe it's you." "Mr. Davenport," I said. my voice professionally neutral. I'm Dr. Brooks. I understand you're experiencing chest pain. Elena, please, he said. I know this is... God, I know this is awkward. But when they said they were calling in a cardiologist, and I saw your name on the hospital directory. Mr. Davenport, I need you to focus on your medical situation right now. How long have you been experiencing chest pain? He stared at me for a moment, perhaps recognizing that I wasn't going to engage with him personally. About 2 hours. It started suddenly, like someone was squeezing my chest. I was scared. I moved to his bedside, checking his monitors, reviewing his chart. His vital signs were stable, but concerning. The EKG showed clear evidence of a heart attack, and his cardiac enzymes confirmed significant damage to his heart muscle. Mr. Davenport, you're having a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We need to get you to the cardiac catheterization lab immediately to restore blood flow to your heart. Will you be doing the procedure? I looked at him. This man who had abandoned me when I needed him most, who had threatened to destroy me if I tried to hold him accountable for his actions. He was lying in a hospital bed, vulnerable and frightened, completely dependent on my skill and judgment. Yes, I said. I'll be performing your cardiac catheterization. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years ago, he'd held my future in his hands and had chosen to walk away. Now I held his life in mine. The cardiac catheterization lab was a sterile environment of monitors, imaging equipment, and surgical precision. I'd performed hundreds of these procedures over the years, but none had felt quite like this. Miles was sedated but conscious, lying on the table as my team prepared him for the procedure. I'd explained the risks: bleeding, infection, damage to blood vessels, the possibility that we might not be able to restore adequate blood flow to his heart. Dr. Brooks, he'd said as they wheeled him into the lab, I need to tell you about Leo. This isn't the time for personal conversations, Mr. Davenport, I'd replied. We need to focus on your medical care. Now. As I guided the catheter through his coronary arteries, I could see the extent of the damage. A major artery was completely blocked, and the surrounding tissue was dying from lack of oxygen. It was treatable, but it would require precise technique and a bit of luck. Dr. Brooks, my assistant, Dr. Jennifer Park, said quietly. His blood pressure is dropping. I looked at the monitors. Miles was going into cardiogenic shock. His heart was too damaged to pump blood effectively. Without immediate intervention, he would die. Prepare the balloon pump, I ordered, and get me the drug-eluting stent. We're going to have to work fast. For the next hour, I fought to save his life. It was purely professional, purely medical. I didn't think about the pregnancy test I'd taken 20 years ago, or the check he'd tried to give me, or the way he'd walked out of the cafe without looking back. I thought about catheter placement and stent deployment and the rhythm of a heart that was struggling to keep beating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the blocked artery opened. Blood flow was restored, and Miles's vital signs began to stabilize. Excellent work, Dr. Brooks, Dr. Park said as we watched the contrast dye flow freely through his previously blocked coronary artery. That was a difficult case, I nodded, pulling off my surgical gloves. He'll need to be monitored closely for the next 48 hours. There's still a risk of complications. As I left the catheterization lab, I allowed myself a moment to process what had just happened. I'd saved his life. The man who had abandoned me and threatened to destroy me. I'd just spent an hour ensuring that he would live. There was a certain poetic justice in it, I realized. 20 years ago, he'd had the power to support me or abandon me, and he'd chosen abandonment. Today, I'd had the power to save him or let him die, and I'd chosen to save him, because that's who I was, that's who I'd become. Miles was in the cardiac intensive care unit for 3 days. I checked on him regularly, reviewing his progress, adjusting his medications, monitoring his recovery. Our interactions were strictly professional. I was his doctor, he was my patient, and nothing more. On the fourth day, he was transferred to a regular room. His prognosis was good. With proper medication and lifestyle changes, he could expect to live a normal life. Dr. Brooks, he said when I came to check on him that afternoon. Could we talk, not about my medical care, but about everything else? I looked at him, lying in the hospital bed with his chart in my hands. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the experience of nearly dying. What would you like to talk about, Mr. Davenport? About Leo. About what I did to you. About everything? I set his chart aside and sat in the chair beside his bed. What about Leo? I know about him. I've always known about him. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? I mean, I've kept track of you over the years. I know you raised him alone, that you went to medical school, that you became a cardiologist. I know he's 17 now, that he's brilliant, that he wants to be a doctor like you. You've been watching us? Not watching, just knowing. I hired a private investigator a few years after you left Colorado. I wanted to make sure you were okay, that you didn't need anything. That we didn't need anything, I corrected. He's your son, Miles. I know. His voice was quiet. I've known for 20 years. And I've regretted walking away from you every single day since then. I stared at him. You regretted it? Elena, I was 24 years old and terrified. My father had made it clear that if I got involved with someone unsuitable, he'd cut me off completely. I was selfish and scared, and I made the worst decision of my life. You threatened to destroy me if I tried to claim you as the father. I know. I was protecting myself and my family's reputation, and I didn't think about what I was doing to you. I was a coward. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Do you know what the worst part was, Miles? It wasn't the money problems or the sleepless nights or having to drop out of school. It was explaining to Leo why his father didn't want him. What did you tell him? The truth, that you chose not to be part of his life, that it was your loss, not his. It was my loss, he said quietly. The biggest loss of my life. I turned back to face him. Why are you telling me this now? Because I almost died. And the thought of dying without trying to make things right with you and Leo was unbearable. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know I have no right to want a relationship with either of you. But I needed you to know that I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Leo doesn't need you, I said. He's 17 years old, and he's never needed you. He's strong and kind and brilliant, and he did all of that without you. I know, but maybe I could still be part of his life somehow. Maybe I could try to be the father I should have been 20 years ago. I looked at him, this man who had shaped my life by abandoning it, who had forced me to become stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. There was something pathetic about him now, lying in a hospital bed and asking for forgiveness after 20 years. Miles, I said, I saved your life because I'm a doctor, and that's what doctors do. But that doesn't mean I forgive you, and it doesn't mean Leo needs you in his life. I have money, he said desperately. I could help with college, with medical school. I could set up a trust fund. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Do you think this is about money? Do you think that's what we've been missing all these years? I just want to help. Leo is going to Harvard next year on a full academic scholarship. He's been accepted to their accelerated medical program. He doesn't need your money. Miles, he doesn't need anything from you. The room fell silent. Miles stared at me, processing what I'd said. Harvard, he repeated. Full scholarship. That's right. He's going to be a doctor, just like his mother, and he's going to do it without any help from you, just like everything else in his life. Elena, please. I know I don't deserve it, but couldn't you at least let me meet him? Let me tell him I'm sorry. I walked back to his bedside and picked up his chart. Mr. Davenport, you're going to be discharged tomorrow. Your recovery is progressing well, and you should be able to return to normal activities within a few weeks. I'll be referring you to Dr. Martinez for your ongoing cardiac care. Elena, Dr. Brooks, I corrected. And no, you can't meet Leo. You made your choice 20 years ago, and I made mine. We've both lived with the consequences. I moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. Miles, I want you to understand something. I don't hate you. I don't spend my time thinking about you or wishing you ill. You're simply irrelevant to my life and my son's life. You were a chapter that ended 20 years ago, and we've written an entire book since then. But you were wrong about one thing, though, I continued. You thought I wasn't your type, that I wasn't good enough for your family. But it turns out you weren't good enough for mine. I left the room, closing the door behind me with a soft click. Miles was discharged the next day. I signed his release papers and handed them to Dr. Martinez, who would be taking over his care. I didn't see him leave the hospital, didn't say goodbye, didn't acknowledge his departure in any way. That evening, I sat in my office finishing paperwork when Leo knocked on my door. Mom, Janet said you wanted to see me. I looked up at my son, 17 years old and already taller than me, with the same dark hair I'd had at his age and eyes that were entirely his own. He was wearing his volunteer uniform from the hospital, where he'd been working with the pediatric patients. How was your day? I asked. Good. I helped Dr. Kim with a procedure on a little girl who had a heart defect. She was so brave, Mom. Only 5 years old, and she wasn't scared at all. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Come sit down for a minute. He settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where Miles had sat just hours earlier, begging for a chance to meet his son. Leo, I need to tell you something about your father. His expression became guarded. We'd had this conversation before, always at his initiation, always when he was younger and more curious about the missing piece of his family puzzle. What about him? He was a patient here this week. He had a heart attack, and I performed his cardiac catheterization. Leo's eyes widened. He was here, in the hospital? Yes, he's going to be fine, but he wanted to meet you. He asked me to arrange it. What did you tell him? I studied my son's face, looking for any sign of longing or curiosity. Instead, I saw the same calm intelligence that had carried him through every challenge in his life. I told him no. I told him that you didn't need him, that you'd built your life without him and didn't require his presence now. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Was that the right decision? I don't know, I admitted. It was the decision I made based on what I thought was best for you. But you're 17 now, almost an adult. If you want to meet him, if you want to know him, I won't stop you. Mom, Leo said, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm missing something by not having a father? I considered the question carefully. I think you're missing one version of what a family can look like, but I think you have everything you need to be the person you're meant to be. I agree, he said simply. I'm curious about him, obviously, but I don't need him. We've done fine without him. Better than fine, I said. We've done amazingly. Leo smiled, the same smile that had carried me through medical school and residency and the hardest years of building my practice. Besides, if he was the kind of person who would abandon you when you needed him most, he's probably not the kind of person I want to know. Leo. Mom, I'm proud of who we are. I'm proud of how hard you worked to give me opportunities, and I'm proud of how we've supported each other. Why would I want to mess that up by bringing someone into our lives who already proved he's not reliable? I felt tears sting my eyes. When did you become so wise? I learned from the best, he said, standing up and walking around the desk to hug me. Besides, I figure if I ever want to know what he's like, I can just ask Dr. Martinez. She's been talking about her new cardiac patient who keeps asking about Dr. Brooks and her son. He's been asking about us? Apparently, Dr. Martinez says he's been trying to get information about you, about me, about our lives. She told him that patient confidentiality works both ways. I smiled. Dr. Martinez is a good friend. She also said he left something for you at the nurse's station. I frowned. What kind of something? I don't know, but Janet has it at the front desk. After Leo left to finish his volunteer shift, I walked to the front desk where Janet was organizing files. Janet, Leo said someone left something for me? Oh yes, Dr. Brooks. Mr. Davenport left this when he was discharged. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I recognized despite the years. I took the envelope to my office and stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check. The check was for $500,000. The letter was brief. Elena, I know you won't cash this check, and I know you don't need the money. I'm not writing it because I think I can buy forgiveness or a place in Leo's life. I'm writing it because I want you to know that I understand what I cost you 20 years ago. This represents the child support I should have paid, plus interest, plus the cost of your medical school tuition, plus compensation for the career you could have had if you hadn't been raising our son alone. I know it's not enough. I know money can't repair the damage I did or give back the years I stole from you. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the magnitude of what you accomplished without me. You were right about everything. You were strong enough to raise Leo alone, smart enough to become a doctor, and brave enough to build a life that didn't need me in it. You were always better than I deserved. I'm proud of you, Elena. I'm proud of the doctor you became, the mother you are, and the woman you've always been. And I'm proud of Leo, even though I have no right to be. I won't contact you again. Thank you for saving my life. I know you did it because you're a doctor, not because you forgave me, but thank you anyway. Miles. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope along with the check. Then I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and filed it away next to Leo's acceptance letter from Harvard and the photo from my medical school graduation. Some things were worth keeping, not because they mattered, but because they reminded you of how far you'd come. Spring arrived early in Portland that year, and the cherry trees outside my office window were already beginning to bloom. I was reviewing patient files when Janet knocked on my door. Doc Brooks, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. I looked up, half expecting to see Miles despite his promise not to contact me again. Instead, I saw a young man I didn't recognize, probably in his early 20s, with nervous energy and an expensive suit. Doc Brooks, my name is Andrew Davenport. I'm Miles Davenport's son. I set down my pen. I see. How can I help you, Mr. Davenport? I know this is unusual, but I wanted to meet you. My father told me about what happened, about Leo, about everything. Your father has other children. My stepmother and he had 2 kids after they got married. I'm the older one. But Dr. Brooks, that's not why I'm here. He sat down without being invited, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. My father is sick again. The heart attack he had 6 months ago caused more damage than we initially thought. He needs a heart transplant, and he's been placed on the waiting list. I felt a familiar professional detachment settle over me. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because he's been talking about Leo constantly, about how proud he is, about how much he regrets not being part of his life. And I realized something. Dr. Brooks, I have a brother I've never met. Leo isn't interested in meeting your family, I said carefully. I know. My father told me what you said, about how Leo doesn't need him and has done fine without him, and you're absolutely right. But Dr. Brooks, I need to meet him. Why? Andrew was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Because I grew up with Miles Davenport as my father, and I know what kind of man he is. He's selfish and manipulative, and he spent my entire life trying to buy my love instead of earning it. But when he talks about Leo, he becomes someone different, someone who understands what he lost. That doesn't change anything, Andrew. Maybe not. But I have a brother who's about to start Harvard, who's going to be a doctor, who accomplished all of that without any help from the family that should have supported him. And I want to know him, not because of my father, but despite him. I studied this young man, trying to see any resemblance to Miles or to Leo. There was something in the jawline, perhaps, and the way he held his shoulders. Even if I agreed to this, which I haven't, Leo would have to want to meet you. He's leaving for Harvard in 3 months, and he's focused on preparing for that. I understand, but could you at least ask him? Could you tell him that he is a half-brother who would like to know him? I considered the request. Leo was 18 now, legally an adult, capable of making his own decisions about relationships and family. He'd shown no interest in Miles, but that didn't necessarily extend to siblings he'd never known existed. I'll mention it to Leo, I said finally. But the decision is entirely his. If he says no, you respect that and don't contact us again. Of course. Thank you. Dr. Brooks. That's all I'm asking for. After Andrew left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. In a few hours, Leo would finish his shift at the hospital and come to my office to ride home with me, the way he had every day for the past 4 years. When he knocked on my door at 6 o'clock, I was still thinking about how to approach the subject. Mom, ready to go home? In a minute, sweetheart. Come sit down. Leo settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where Miles had sat 6 months earlier, where Andrew had sat this afternoon. So many conversations in this room, so many decisions that had shaped our lives. Leo, I had a visitor today. Miles Davenport's son. Your half-brother. Leo's eyebrows rose. I have a half-brother. Apparently, his name is Andrew, and he's about 5 years older than you. He wants to meet you. Wayne, what did you tell him? That I'd ask you, but the decision was entirely yours. Leo leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Is this connected to my father's medical situation? How did you know about that? Dr. Martinez mentioned that he's been readmitted several times since his heart attack. Word gets around the hospital. I nodded. He needs a heart transplant. He's on the waiting list. And his son thinks I should meet him before he dies? I don't know what Andrew thinks. He said he wanted to know you as his brother, not because of your father. Leo was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the cherry trees. Finally, he looked back at me. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. You don't owe Andrew anything, just like you don't owe Miles anything. But you also don't have to cut yourself off from possibilities just because of what happened 20 years ago. Would it bother you if I met him? Leo, the only thing that would bother me is if you made a decision based on what you thought I wanted instead of what you actually wanted. He smiled. You know, most kids don't have to worry about accidentally gaining family members. Most kids don't have our unique situation. True. Okay, I'll meet him. But somewhere public, and you're coming with me. Are you sure? Mom, I'm curious about what it would be like to have a sibling. I'm curious about the family I've never known. That doesn't mean I want them to be part of my life permanently. But it means I'm open to finding out who they are. And if Andrew wants you to reconcile with your father, then I'll tell him the same thing I told you 6 months ago. I don't need him. We've built a perfectly good life without him. And I'm not interested in complicating that now. 3 days later, we met Andrew at a coffee shop near the hospital. Leo wore his usual jeans and Harvard sweatshirt, while Andrew had dressed down from his business suit but still looked distinctly corporate. They were clearly related, seeing them together. I could identify the shared features that weren't immediately obvious individually, the shape of their eyes, the way they gestured when they talked, a certain intensity in their expressions. So you're really going to Harvard? Andrew asked after the initial awkwardness had settled. Full scholarship, Leo replied. Pre-med track, then hopefully their medical school. That's incredible. I went to Yale for business, but I can't imagine getting a full ride anywhere. What do you do now? I work for a pharmaceutical company, not Dad's company. Andrew added quickly. I wanted to make my own way. They talked for an hour about college, careers, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. I watched Leo gradually relax, his natural curiosity overcoming his initial wariness. Can I ask you something? Leo said eventually. What was it like, growing up with him as your father? Andrew considered the question carefully. Complicated. He was never around much when I was little, always working or traveling. When he was around, he tried to buy my affection with expensive gifts and vacations. It took me a long time to realize that love and money aren't the same thing. Do you have a good relationship with him now? We're working on it. His heart attack was a wake-up call for all of us. He's been trying to be more present, more honest about his mistakes. Including me? Especially you. Leo, he talks about you constantly. About how proud he is of your achievements, about how much he regrets not being part of your life. I think meeting you might be the only thing that would give him peace before he dies. Leo glanced at me, then back at Andrew. I'm not responsible for giving him peace. He made his choices 20 years ago. I know. And I'm not asking you to forgive him or to have a relationship with him. I'm just telling you how he feels. How do you feel about it, about having a brother you never knew existed? Andrew smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. Honestly, it's the best thing that's happened to our family in years. I always wanted a sibling, and now I find out I have a brother who's brilliant and accomplished and completely self-sufficient. It's like winning the lottery. Leo laughed. That's an interesting way to put it. Leo, Andrew said, I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider staying in touch? Maybe getting together occasionally when you're home from Harvard? I'm not trying to replace the family you already have, but I'd like to be part of your life if you're open to it. Leo looked at me again. I nodded slightly, indicating that the choice was his. I'd like that, Leo said. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not interested in a relationship with your father. I'm not interested in being part of the Davenport family in any official way. I'm Elena Brooks's son, and that's not changing. I understand completely, and for what it's worth, I think you got the better deal. Your mom is pretty remarkable. She is, Leo agreed, reaching over to squeeze my hand. She's the strongest person I know. As we walked back to the car after saying goodbye to Andrew, Leo was unusually quiet. Penny for your thoughts, I said. I was just thinking about something Andrew said, about how love and money aren't the same thing. What about it? I think that's something I've always known, but I never had to learn it the hard way like he did. You never tried to buy my love, Mom. You just gave it to me, every day, in 1,000 small ways. Leo, I'm serious. I know we didn't have a lot of money when I was little, but I never felt like I was missing anything important. And now, meeting Andrew, I realize that having money doesn't guarantee you'll have love. Andrew seems like a good person. He does. And I think I'd like to know him better. But Mom, I want you to know that none of this changes how I feel about our family. You're my family. You've always been enough. You're going to make me cry in this parking lot, I said, wiping my eyes. Sorry, but I needed you to know. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Leo knocked on my bedroom door. Mom, I've been thinking about something else. What's that? Do you think your father is going to die? I sat down on the edge of my bed. Honestly? Probably. Heart transplants are difficult, and the waiting list is long. Even if he gets a new heart, the recovery is complicated. Would you want to see him before he dies? The question surprised me. Why do you ask? Because I know you saved his life 6 months ago, and I know that was probably difficult for you. But I also know that you've never been a person who holds grudges. And I was wondering if you had any unfinished business with him. I thought about the question seriously. Did I have unfinished business with Miles? I'd said everything I needed to say in his hospital room. I'd made it clear that he was irrelevant to our lives, that we'd succeeded without him, that his abandonment had ultimately made us stronger. No, I said finally. I don't have any unfinished business with him. I made peace with what happened between us a long time ago. Good, because I was worried that you might feel guilty if he died and you hadn't seen him again. Leo, I stopped feeling guilty about Miles Davenport years ago. The only person I ever needed to make peace with was myself. And I did that when I decided to keep you and build our life together. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Miles Davenport died on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 weeks before Leo was scheduled to leave for Harvard. He'd been on the heart transplant waiting list for 8 months, but a compatible heart had never become available. Andrew called to tell us the news. "The funeral is Thursday," he said. "I know Leo said he didn't want a relationship with our father, but I thought you should know." "Thank you for calling," I replied. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Dr. Brooks, there's something else. My father left letters for you and Leo. Would it be okay if I brought them by the hospital?" I hesitated. "Andrew, we've moved on from this. We don't need closure or final messages." "I understand, but he spent a lot of time writing them, and I think he'd want you to have them. You don't have to read them if you don't want to." Later that afternoon, Andrew appeared at my office with 2 sealed envelopes. He handed them to me without comment and left quickly, as if he understood that his presence might make the moment more complicated than it needed to be. I stared at the envelopes for a long time before opening them. The one addressed to me was brief. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means I've died without ever finding the courage to face you again. I know you told me not to contact you, and I've respected that, but I needed to put these words down somewhere. You were right about everything. You were right that I was a coward, right that you didn't need me, right that Leo would be better off without me. You were right that abandoning you was the worst decision of my life, but you were wrong about one thing. You said I wasn't good enough for your family, but the truth is that I was never good enough for you. Not when we were young, not when you needed me most, and not in all the years since then. I've watched from a distance as you built an incredible life. You became the doctor you always wanted to be. You raised our son to be extraordinary. You created a family that was stronger and more loving than anything I could have provided. I know I don't have the right to be proud of you, but I am. I'm proud of your strength, your intelligence, your integrity. I'm proud of the mother you became and the woman you've always been. I'm proud of Leo too, though I know that pride means nothing coming from me. But Elena, when I see what you've accomplished together, I realize that my absence wasn't the tragedy I thought it was. It was the gift you both needed to become who you were meant to be. Thank you for saving my life 6 months ago. I know you did it because you're a doctor, but it meant everything to me to know that when it mattered most, you chose compassion over anger. I hope you and Leo have wonderful lives. I hope he becomes the doctor he wants to be. And I hope you continue to save lives and heal hearts. You've certainly healed mine, even if it took 20 years and a heart attack for me to realize it. Miles." The letter to Leo was longer, filled with regrets and apologies and expressions of pride that he'd never earned the right to feel. I read it carefully, then sealed it back in its envelope. When Leo came to my office that evening, I handed him both letters. "Andrew brought these by," I said. "Your father died this morning." Leo took the envelopes and sat down in his usual chair. He opened his letter and read it silently, his expression unreadable. "He says he's proud of me," Leo said finally. "How does that make you feel?" "Sad for him. Not sad that he's dead, but sad that he spent 20 years being proud of someone he chose not to know." Leo folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. "What did he say to you?" "That we were right. That abandoning us was the worst decision of his life, but that we turned out better without him." "Do you believe that? That we're better off without him?" I thought about the question, about the path that had led us to this moment. I believe we're exactly who we were meant to be. Whether that happened because of his absence or in spite of it doesn't really matter anymore. Leo nodded. "I'm not going to the funeral." "Are you sure?" "Mom, I don't mourn for people I never knew. And I don't need to stand in a room full of strangers and pretend to grieve for a father who was never really my father. What about Andrew? I'll call him, but he'll understand. He knows that his father and I were strangers. That night, Leo left for a farewell party with his high school friends. I stayed home and sat on our back porch, looking out at the river and thinking about the 20 years that had passed since Miles Davenport had walked out of that cafe in Colorado. I thought about the young woman I'd been, scared and pregnant and heartbroken. I thought about the choices I'd made, the sacrifices, the late nights studying while Leo slept. I thought about the moments of doubt, the times when I'd wondered if I was strong enough to do everything alone. And I thought about the woman I'd become, the doctor, the mother, the person who had built a life so full and rich that Miles's death barely registered as a blip in our happiness. The next morning, I was reviewing patient files when Janet knocked on my door. Dr. Brooks, Leo's here with Andrew Davenport. They'd like to see you. I looked up to see Leo and Andrew standing in my doorway, both of them holding coffee cups and looking somber. We went to the funeral, Leo said without preamble. I set down my pen. You changed your mind? Andrew asked me to go with him, not for our father, but for Andrew. He didn't want to face it alone. How was it? Surreal. Leo replied. There were about 50 people there, mostly business associates and family friends. Andrew gave a eulogy about what a complicated man his father was, how he was trying to become better at the end. Did you say anything? No. But afterward, Andrew's mother came up to me and said she was sorry for what happened 20 years ago. She said she always wondered about you, about how you were doing. I looked at Andrew. Your mother knew about us. She found out a few years after I was born. She and my father went through a rough patch when she learned about Leo, but she said something yesterday that I thought you should hear. What's that? She said that my father's biggest regret wasn't losing you. It was that he lost you before he was mature enough to deserve you. That's very kind of her to say. Dr. Brooks, Andrew said, I wanted to ask you something. Leo's leaving for Harvard next week, but I'd like to stay in touch with both of you, not because of my father, but because I've gained a brother and I'd like to gain a friend too, if you're open to it. I looked at Leo, who nodded slightly. I'd like that. Andrew, you're welcome in our family anytime. Thank you. That means a lot to me. After Andrew left, Leo settled into the chair across from my desk one more time. Any regrets? I asked. About going to the funeral? No. It felt like the right thing to do. Not for him, but for Andrew and for myself. I needed to see that chapter close. And now? Now we move forward. I leave for Harvard in 6 days. You continue saving lives, and we keep being the family we've always been. With one addition, Leo agreed. Andrew's a good person. Mom, I think he's going to be a good brother. I think so too. Leo stood up and walked around the desk to hug me. Thank you. For what? For making all the right choices 20 years ago. For choosing me. For choosing us. For choosing to build something beautiful instead of dwelling on what we'd lost. Leo, you were never a choice. You were always the most important thing in my life. I know. But you could have been bitter, or angry, or focused on getting revenge. Instead, you focused on building a life so good that his absence didn't matter. I held my son close. This remarkable young man who was about to leave for Harvard, who would someday be a doctor himself, who had grown up knowing that he was loved unconditionally and completely. You know what the best revenge is? I said. What? Living well, being happy, succeeding beyond anyone's expectations, proving that you never needed the people who underestimated you. Is that what we did? Leo, your father once told me I was the biggest mistake he ever made. But 20 years later, I was the one who saved his life in the operating room. And then I walked away without looking back, because I had a beautiful life to return to. That's pretty good revenge, Leo admitted. The best kind. The kind where you win, not by destroying your enemies, but by building something so wonderful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. As I watched Leo leave my office for the last time before Harvard, I realized that Miles Davenport had been right about one thing. His absence hadn't been a tragedy. It had been exactly what Leo and I needed to become, who we were meant to be. He'd left me when I was pregnant, broken and afraid. But in doing so, he'd given me the greatest gift of my life, the opportunity to discover just how strong I really was. And in the end, that strength had been more valuable than any love he could have offered.